It was a quiet evening at the local restaurant, the kind of place where people come to unwind after a long day. The soft hum of conversations and the clink of silverware on plates filled the air. The aroma of fresh food wafted from the kitchen, and for most, the world outside seemed a little bit further away. But for one woman, this ordinary night would quickly turn into something extraordinary, in the most unexpected way. Her name was Emily. A dedicated nurse, she'd spent the day caring for others, offering comfort to those in need. She was used to the stress, the chaos, and the long hours that come with the job. But as she walked into the restaurant, the weight of her scrubs didn't feel heavy. It was the kind of place where she could finally sit down and relax. Just a quiet dinner alone, away from the hospital. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape. But as she settled into her seat, a loud roar of motorcycle engines shattered the calm. The entrance doors swung open, and enrolled a group of bikers. They weren't your typical, friendly motorcycle enthusiasts. No, these were the type of guys that had earned their reputation. Their leather jackets were adorned with patches, their faces were rough with years of life on the road, and their presence alone commanded attention. The bikers made their way to the bar, the noise they brought with them unmistakable. But Emily didn't pay them much mind at first. After all, she wasn't there to get involved in anyone else's business. However, the air shifted the moment they sat down nearby. A few of them started to eye her. It was subtle at first, but she could feel the tension building. Emily, a woman used to facing challenges head-on, didn't let it bother her. She turned her attention back to her menu. What she didn't know was that they were about to make her their target. There was something about her calm, composed demeanor that seemed to irk them. Maybe it was her confidence, maybe it was the fact that she wasn't intimidated. One of the bikers, a large man with a thick beard and a patched vest, stood up and made his way toward her. Emily looked up, meeting his gaze, trying to ignore the unease that began to creep into her stomach. "Hey, nurse. You look a little lost," he said, his voice low, a sneer playing at the edge of his lips. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. It was a classic power move. He was trying to provoke her, to get a rise out of her. She could see the smirk on his face as he leaned against the back of her chair, clearly expecting her to back down or show weakness. But Emily wasn't the kind of person who did that. She wasn't afraid of him or anyone like him. She had faced far tougher situations in the emergency room, things far scarier than a biker trying to make her uncomfortable at a restaurant. With a deep breath, she met his gaze once more, her voice calm but firm. "I'm just here to eat," she said, the words simple but filled with a quiet strength. The man didn't take kindly to her response. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space, his breath hot against her ear. "I don't think you understand," he said, his tone darker now. "You don't get to sit here, acting all high and mighty like you're better than us. This is our place, not yours." Emily remained still, her heart beginning to race. There was a shift in the atmosphere now. Other bikers at the table began to take notice, and soon enough, they were all watching her. The laughter had died down, replaced with a charged silence. Emily could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. It was as if the entire room had shifted, and she was the center of their attention. But then, just as things seemed like they were about to spiral out of control, something inside Emily clicked. She wasn't going to let them intimidate her. She wasn't going to cower, not in front of these men, not after everything she had been through. In the hospital, she had to make split-second decisions that could mean life or death. This wasn't any different. She could handle it. "Listen," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "I don't want any trouble. But if you're looking for a fight, you've got the wrong person." She stood up slowly, maintaining eye contact with the biker, refusing to let him see any fear in her eyes. The biker didn't back down. Instead, he grinned, clearly enjoying the way she was standing her ground. "We'll see about that," he said with a menacing chuckle, and just as he stepped forward, another voice interrupted. "Hey, is there a problem here?" The sound of the manager, a kind man named Greg, filled the room. He had been keeping an eye on the situation from the moment the bikers walked in. Emily didn't know whether to feel relieved or nervous. It was clear that Greg was trying to de-escalate things, but the bikers weren't the type to back down easily. The tension in the room was palpable now. Emily could see the wheels turning in the bikers' heads. They were used to getting their way, used to pushing people around and getting what they wanted without question. But Emily wasn't about to let them do that. Not now, not here. Greg stepped closer, his presence calming but assertive. "You're causing a scene," he said, his tone firm. "Either you show respect or you leave. I don't care who you are." The biker leader turned to face Greg, his eyes narrowing. It was clear this wasn't the first time someone had tried to confront him. For a moment, it felt like the situation was on the verge of exploding. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog, with every person in the restaurant holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. And then, something unexpected happened. A voice from behind Emily spoke up, steady and strong. It was another woman, a waitress who had seen enough of the chaos. She spoke with a sense of authority, something Emily hadn't expected to come from someone working in the back. "That's right," the waitress said, crossing her arms. "They're just here to cause trouble. Maybe it's time they leave." The room fell silent again. Emily could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of everyone on her and the bikers. She knew she wasn't alone in this. People were starting to take notice, and this wasn't just her fight anymore. But the bikers were far from backing down. Their leader took a step back, glaring at the waitress, then at Greg. His group of followers exchanged tense looks, muttering among themselves. Emily could sense the storm wasn't over. As the biker leader slowly turned back toward her, she braced herself. The atmosphere in the room was thick with uncertainty. Would they finally back off? Or had Emily just made a mistake, challenging a group of people who wouldn't think twice about pushing things too far? The next few moments were crucial. And just as she opened her mouth to say something, a loud noise from the kitchen interrupted everything. The door swung open. Someone was about to make a move. Would it be Emily standing tall, or would this be the beginning of something far worse? The room tensed, the sound of the kitchen door swinging open almost deafening in the stillness. Everyone in the restaurant seemed to freeze, as if waiting for the next move. Emily's pulse quickened. Was it another threat? Had one of the bikers gone too far? Her mind raced as she scanned the room, looking for any signs of movement or someone who might come to her aid. The bikers hadn't backed down yet, and neither had she. But she was starting to wonder if that was enough. The figure that appeared from the kitchen, however, was not another biker. It was a tall man, broad-shouldered and carrying a tray of drinks, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Emily. For a split second, their gazes locked, and something about his calm expression seemed to reassure her. It was like a moment of clarity in a storm. "Is everything all right out here?" The man's voice was firm, yet not threatening. He wasn't part of the drama, but his presence was enough to make a statement. Emily didn't have time to respond. The biker leader, who had been towering over her moments before, suddenly directed his attention to the newcomer. His eyes narrowed, sizing up the situation, a flash of annoyance crossing his face. The power dynamic was shifting, and the bikers could sense it. This was no longer just about Emily. The bartender, who had been watching the exchange from the other end of the bar, walked over. "You need to leave," he said, addressing the bikers directly, his voice calm but unwavering. "This is a place for everyone, but not for this kind of trouble." For a split second, there was silence, as if the entire room was holding its breath. The bikers exchanged looks, and the leader's fingers twitched, as if considering a response that could escalate things even further. But then, something unexpected happened. The large biker with the thick beard, who had been the most vocal and aggressive up to this point, let out a low chuckle. "I think we've had enough fun for tonight," he said, his tone shifting from threatening to almost mocking. The tension in the air remained thick, but it was like a flicker of something in the leader's eyes told the others to back off. He shot one final, lingering glance at Emily, a challenge still hanging between them. But instead of taking things further, he turned on his heel and walked out, followed by the rest of his gang. The roar of their motorcycles filled the air as they revved up and pulled away from the parking lot. Emily stood still for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. The room, which had been filled with unease and hostility only moments before, slowly started to return to normal. People began to relax, and the hum of conversation resumed, though there was still a certain edge to the air. The bartender let out a relieved sigh. "Looks like they knew when to call it quits," he muttered, shaking his head as he wiped down the bar. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She hadn't expected them to back down, let alone leave. It was a strange feeling, knowing that she had stood up to them and lived to tell the tale. She had faced their intimidation head-on, and despite the odds, she hadn't backed down. But it didn't feel like a victory, more like a moment of survival. The man from the kitchen, who had stepped in with quiet authority, gave her a small smile as he returned to his duties. Emily returned the gesture, grateful but still on edge. She felt the eyes of the room on her, some of them filled with admiration, others with curiosity. She was just a nurse, someone who had only wanted a peaceful dinner. Yet here she was, at the center of a showdown, and she couldn't help but wonder if it was really over. As she sat back down at her table, the weight of the situation finally began to sink in. She had faced a group of intimidating men, a gang of bikers who had no reason to let her walk away unscathed. But somehow, she had come out of it unscathed herself. And though she had won the immediate battle, there was still a nagging feeling in her gut. What if this wasn't over? What if the bikers weren't done with her yet? Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her from her thoughts. She picked it up and glanced at the screen, only to find a message from her best friend, Rachel. "You good? Heard something went down at the restaurant. You all right?" Emily's fingers hovered over the keys as she typed a quick reply, "I'm fine. Just a little shaken up, but it's over." They left. But as she hit send, her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from a number she didn't recognize. "You better watch your back, nurse. Some people don't like being embarrassed." The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the message, her breath catching in her throat. Who had sent this? Was this the start of something bigger? Had she unknowingly crossed a line she shouldn't have? And what were these bikers planning? The more she thought about it, the more her stomach churned. This wasn't just a random encounter. There was more to this than she realized, and now she had a target on her back. As she tried to calm her nerves, another message popped up, this time from Greg, the manager. "Everything okay on your end? I'll make sure security is aware of what happened. If you need anything, just let me know." Emily quickly typed back, "Thanks, I'll be fine. But I think we may not be done with this yet." The uncertainty loomed over her like a dark cloud, but for now, she tried to push it out of her mind. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She had faced far scarier situations in her life than a few bikers trying to mess with her. But this wasn't just about tonight anymore. This felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. And as she left the restaurant, her steps quick and her mind racing, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Emily's heart raced as she stepped out of the restaurant, the cold night air brushing against her skin. It was a stark contrast to the heat of the tension that had simmered in the dining room just moments before. She walked briskly, her thoughts spinning. The bikers were gone, yes, but that unsettling feeling hadn't left her. There was a knot in her stomach, one that told her that whatever had just happened, whatever she had just survived, wasn't over. It couldn't be. She had faced people like that before. As a nurse, she'd seen her fair share of difficult, sometimes dangerous situations. In the ER, she'd dealt with patients from all walks of life, gang members, troubled teens, anxious parents, even aggressive drunks. But this felt different. There was something in the way the bikers had looked at her, the way they had circled her like predators, that made her feel like she was more than just an innocent bystander in this. Emily wasn't naive enough to think she could just walk away from a situation like this without consequences. As she walked towards her car, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Rachel. She had already left several missed calls. Emily hadn't wanted to answer earlier, not wanting to talk about what had just happened. She wasn't sure what to say herself. But now, with the reality of the situation setting in, she figured Rachel would want to know what had gone down. Asterisk Emily, where are you? I'm worried. Call me. Asterisk Emily felt a pang of guilt. Rachel was her best friend. And she could always count on her to be there, whether it was celebrating a promotion or talking her through a rough day. But she hadn't been able to talk to her after the restaurant incident. It wasn't that Emily was embarrassed, it was just that she didn't know how to explain the feeling of unease that had settled inside her, how things didn't seem to add up. She wanted to reassure Rachel, but at the same time, she didn't want to admit she wasn't entirely sure she was safe. She called Rachel back, holding the phone against her ear as she started the car. The engine rumbled to life, but it was a hollow sound against the pounding of her heart. Emily? Are you okay? Rachel's voice came through the phone, tight with concern. What the hell happened? I heard the bikers made a scene. You sound off. I'm fine, Emily said, trying to sound more convincing than she felt. It was just some guys who thought they could push me around. But it's over now. They left. Are you sure? Rachel asked, the concern never leaving her tone. That doesn't sound like something that just ends like that. Emily paused. She didn't want to admit that it didn't feel over. I don't know, Ratch. It just didn't sit right with me. It was like they were waiting for me to back down, and when I didn't, they didn't know what to do. She rubbed a hand over her face, the fatigue of the day catching up with her. But it's fine now. They're gone. I'm just heading home. Rachel was silent for a moment before responding, her voice quieter now. Emily, you're a nurse, right? You're used to tough situations, but you're also used to knowing what's going on. This feels like you don't know what's next. I'm worried. Don't be, Emily said, her voice more forceful than she intended. I'll be fine. I've handled worse, and this isn't anything I can't handle. She hung up before Rachel could say anything else. It wasn't that she didn't value her friend's concern, she did. But right now, she couldn't deal with it. Her mind was racing too fast, trying to process everything that had happened in the restaurant. The bikers had been menacing, but there had been something more to their behavior. They weren't just after a confrontation. There was something personal in the way they had targeted her. She was just a nurse. Just an ordinary woman, minding her own business. So why had they zeroed in on her? She drove through the dark streets, the glow of the streetlights flickering overhead. The restaurant was behind her now, but the events still felt fresh, too close. The more she thought about it, the more questions she had. Who were they really? What was their connection to her? And why, out of all the people in that room, had they chosen her? As she turned onto her street and pulled into her driveway, Emily glanced at her phone again. There was a new message from an unknown number. It was a simple text, *, "You've got our attention now, nurse. Don't think you can hide." *, her stomach dropped. She could feel the heat creeping up her neck as her fingers froze over the phone screen. This wasn't some random prank or a case of tough talk. No, these men had something more in mind. This was serious. The reality of it hit her all at once. She was being targeted. But why? What had she done to make them go after her? The thought gnawed at her insides like a constant, simmering anxiety. She had to make sense of it, to find out who they were and why they were so interested in her. As she stepped out of the car, she looked around, her senses heightened. The quiet of the neighborhood felt different now. The rustling of leaves in the wind sounded louder, more ominous. She glanced up and down the street but saw nothing unusual. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, was watching her. She couldn't explain it, but she had to trust her instincts. Something wasn't right. Inside her house, she locked the door behind her and turned on the lights. The warmth of the familiar space felt comforting, but even in the safety of her own home, she felt exposed. Her phone buzzed again. She hesitated, her eyes scanning the room before picking it up. Another message, this time with a photo attached. It was a picture of the restaurant. The one she had just left. But it wasn't a normal shot. It was taken from the back, from a distance. The blurry outline of her own figure could be seen at the table, and just behind her, a shadowy figure lingered in the corner of the frame, just out of sight. She gasped, her hands shaking. How had they known where she was? How had they even gotten that picture? Her mind raced, and fear began to crawl beneath her skin. She wasn't just dealing with random troublemakers. This was something calculated. This was personal. Her phone rang again. It was Rachel. Emily quickly answered. You need to tell me what's going on. You're not acting like yourself. This isn't just about the bikers, is it? What's really happening?" Emily looked at the photo on her phone once more, her pulse quickening. She couldn't answer Rachel right away. She couldn't put it into words. How could she explain that everything felt off, that she felt like she was in danger without even knowing why? "I don't know, Rachel," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I'm in trouble. Real trouble." The line went quiet. Neither of them spoke. Emily felt the weight of the words sink in. She didn't know how to get out of this, but she knew one thing for certain: whatever she had walked into, it wasn't going to end tonight. Emily sank onto the couch, clutching her phone with trembling hands. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with the tension that had been building since she walked out of that restaurant. The lights in her house flickered slightly, as if the electricity itself was uncertain, mirroring the unease that gripped her. She glanced at the clock, it was just past midnight. But sleep wasn't something that seemed achievable tonight. Not with the unknown number's message still lingering in her mind. Rachel's voice broke through the silence, her tone now urgent. Listen to me. You need to go to the police. If someone's threatening you, this isn't something you can just handle on your own. You're not alone in this. You have people who care about you." The words sounded comforting, and for a moment, Emily wanted to agree. She wanted to believe that everything could be solved by just reporting it, filing a report, getting some protection. But she knew it wasn't that simple. The bikers weren't just anyone. This wasn't some random group of troublemakers who could be scared off by a few stern words or a badge. The more Emily thought about it, the more she realized that these men had power, connections. This was far from a typical encounter. "I'm not sure the police can help, Rachel," Emily said, her voice tight with anxiety. "These guys, they're not just a group of bikers. I think they're part of something bigger. Something dangerous. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm not sure anyone can protect me from whatever they're planning." Rachel was silent on the other end of the line, but Emily could hear the worry in her friend's breath. The way she exhaled slowly, as though trying to come up with a solution. But Emily wasn't sure there was one. Not right now. The photo that had been sent to her wasn't just an image. It was a warning. And it made her realize that she had been watched long before tonight. There was no way they could have gotten a shot of her from behind if they hadn't been paying attention to her movements, if they hadn't been staking out that place, waiting for the right moment. She had been a target from the very beginning. "Look," Rachel said, her voice softer now, trying to reassure Emily, "I know you're scared, but you don't have to do this alone. You need to stay with someone. Come stay at my place tonight, okay? I'm not letting you be alone. We'll figure this out together." Emily paused, the offer hanging in the air between them. The thought of being with Rachel, of having someone close who cared, was tempting. But even that didn't feel right. She couldn't drag her best friend into this. Rachel didn't deserve to be caught up in whatever this mess was. "I can't, Rachel. I appreciate it, but I don't want to put you in danger. I'll be okay. I just need to figure this out on my own." Emily's voice broke at the last part, the fear bubbling up from deep within. "I have to figure out who they are. Why they're after me." Another silence stretched out between them. Rachel didn't argue. Instead, Emily could hear the soft sound of her friend's breath, the resigned understanding that she couldn't force Emily to do anything. Finally, Rachel spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "Okay. But you promise me you'll be careful? If anything else happens, anything at all, you call me. Or you call someone. I don't care who it is, but don't try to handle this on your own. Promise?" "I promise," Emily said, her voice quiet but determined. "But right now, I think the best thing I can do is figure out what's going on. I don't want to be caught off guard again." With one last promise to stay safe, Emily hung up the phone. Her mind was still racing, and the questions kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. Who were these bikers? What did they want from her? Why her, of all people? She wasn't involved in anything shady. She had no ties to organized crime or anyone who might have crossed paths with a group like that. She was just a nurse, trying to make a difference in the world. But somehow, she had become a part of something much darker than she could have ever imagined. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. Her mind wandered back to the moments in the restaurant. The way the bikers had sized her up, the way they had watched her closely as if they were waiting for something. The moment the leader had leaned over her, his voice threatening, a sneer in his eyes, it all replayed in her mind like a broken record. But now, with the messages, the photo, and the feeling of being hunted, she couldn't shake the growing sense that she was being drawn into something she didn't understand. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of vulnerability she wasn't used to. She'd always been strong. She'd always faced challenges head-on, both at work and in life. But this was different. She wasn't prepared for this kind of fight. She wasn't even sure where to begin. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her spiraling thoughts. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. Unknown number. Emily hesitated for only a second before answering. "Hello?" A low, gravelly voice came through the line. "You're not so tough now, are you? Thought you could walk away from this?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was him. The biker leader. "What do you want from me?" Her voice was shaky, but she forced herself to sound as steady as possible. "Nothing yet," the voice answered with a chuckle. "But that can change. You made a mistake, nurse. A big one. You don't know who you're messing with. The line went dead before she could respond. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily felt the weight of his words settle over her. This wasn't just some group of bikers she could push back. Whoever they were, they had the resources, the power, and the resolve to make her life a nightmare. And now, they were letting her know that she was their target. Her hands shook as she hung up the phone. The fear she had been trying to suppress now flooded to the surface, as sharp and real as it had ever been. She had no idea where this was going, but one thing was certain: she was caught in the middle of something that wasn't just a threat. It was a war, one that had her in its sights. She took one last look out the window, scanning the street for any sign of movement. Nothing. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, quiet, almost like nothing had changed. But Emily knew better now. The silence wasn't comforting. It was a warning. She wasn't safe. Not yet. And with that thought, a cold realization gripped her: she needed to prepare. For what, she wasn't sure, but she knew it was coming. And whatever it was, she had to be ready to face it. The phone call had left Emily rattled, but she tried not to let it show. Her hands gripped the edges of the table as she stared at the silent screen. The leader's words echoed in her mind, like a curse she couldn't shake. You don't know who you're messing with. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was crushing. She wasn't just in over her head. She was caught in a web, tangled in something far bigger than she could have imagined. She forced herself to move. Pacing the room, trying to clear her mind, she scanned the papers scattered on her desk. Medical records, prescriptions, a few unpaid bills. She didn't know why it felt like something was missing, but it did. The pieces of her life were slipping out of focus, and the more she tried to grab hold of them, the further they drifted. What had she done to draw attention like this? Was it something from her past? Or was this all connected to the restaurant incident? A knock at the door startled her, and she froze, her breath catching. She hadn't heard anyone pull up outside, and there was no car parked in front of her house. Yet the knock came again, quiet but insistent. Emily's heart raced, but she didn't move toward the door. Instead, she crept silently to the window, peeking through the blinds to see if anyone was out there. There was nothing. The street remained empty, the houses dark, except for a single light across the road. Emily pressed her back against the wall, trying to steady her breath. She wasn't going crazy. She'd felt the presence of someone outside. The question was, who? Was this part of their game? Was it another attempt to rattle her? The knock came again, and this time, she couldn't ignore it. Slowly, cautiously, she crossed the room and unlocked the door. She opened it just a crack, her hand ready to push it shut if necessary. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the racing in her chest. Standing on her doorstep was a man she didn't recognize, his face hidden beneath a hood. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto hers, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. "I heard about what happened at the restaurant." Emily felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The man didn't look threatening, his posture was casual, his hands in his pockets, but the fact that he knew what had happened only hours ago made her instincts flare. How did he know? Was he connected to them? "I'm fine," she replied quickly, trying to keep her tone neutral. "How do you know about that?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze flickered past her, as if searching for something. Then, he looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "You have to be careful," he said, his voice growing more serious. "People who run in those circles don't forget easily. And they don't like being crossed." Before Emily could respond, the man stepped back slightly, as if to leave. Then he paused, as if reconsidering his words. Just stay aware. Don't trust anyone who gets too close. They have eyes everywhere." With that, he turned and walked off without another word, disappearing into the darkness of the street. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her mind reeling. Who was he? What did he mean by eyes everywhere? She couldn't afford to trust anyone, but the warning felt genuine. There was something about the man, something unsettling. He knew more than he was letting on, and that made her nervous. But what was the connection between him and the bikers? Did they send him? Or was he some sort of ally, someone who understood how deep this was going? She locked the door again, feeling a sudden urgency to get moving. If the bikers weren't going to give up, then neither would she. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Emily pulled her phone from her pocket and scanned through the messages again. The photo of her in the restaurant. The threats. Everything pointed to the fact that they were watching her, and if she wasn't careful, she would become the next piece in their game. But what kind of game were they playing? Her mind drifted to the brief conversation with Rachel earlier. You're not alone in this. You have people who care about you. Rachel was right to worry. This wasn't something Emily could handle by herself. She had no idea who these people were, or what they were capable of. But there was one thing she did know: she wasn't going to be a passive player in this anymore. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she had to act. She couldn't sit back and wait for them to make their next move. She needed information, and the only way to get it was to dive deeper into this mystery. But where to begin? Who could she trust? And was there anyone who could help her? She couldn't turn to the police, not yet. They wouldn't have the answers she needed, and she didn't have time to wait around for them to act. Her thoughts turned to her colleague, Alex. He wasn't just any doctor, he had a reputation for knowing things that didn't show up in a patient's chart or hospital records. Emily had worked with him long enough to know that he had a network. He had access to information that others didn't. If there was anyone who could help her figure out who was behind all of this, it was Alex. But trusting him came with its own set of risks. She had to be careful. After all, who she trusted could be just as dangerous as who was threatening her. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door, determined to get to the bottom of this. She had one goal in mind now: answers. As she started her car and pulled out of the driveway, she glanced up at the darkened sky, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. She didn't know where this path would lead, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going to wait around to find out if they were planning to make her the next target. The shadows outside seemed to stretch longer, and the streetlights flickered as if they were losing power, much like her sense of control over the situation. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She wasn't just an innocent bystander caught in a bizarre encounter. She was now part of something she couldn't undo. And the deeper she went, the more uncertain her future became. With every mile that passed, the suspense grew thicker. Who were these bikers? What was their connection to her? And what did they really want? Emily didn't have the answers yet, but she was determined to find out. She was about to dive headfirst into a world that she had never seen before, one that had no rules, no mercy, and no way out. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel as she drove, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities and unanswered questions. The streets, normally familiar, seemed unfamiliar now, as if they, too, had changed in the face of this new reality. The city that once felt safe, even comforting, now felt foreign. It was as though the shadows that fell between the streetlights were no longer benign, they were a warning. She could barely remember the last time she felt truly safe. Was it when she was working at the hospital? Her mind drifted to the quiet hours spent in the emergency room, where the usual chaos of patients and medical crises kept her focused. She had always believed in the power of helping others, of making a difference where she could. But now, in the midst of this twisted game, that certainty had eroded. Nothing seemed certain anymore. As she turned the corner, Emily glanced at her phone. She hadn't received any more messages, but the silence felt like an ominous calm before the storm. The photo, the phone call, the mysterious man who had come to her door, they were all pieces of a puzzle that she hadn't even begun to understand. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The same eyes that had been on her in the restaurant, and that she suspected had followed her home, were still there, lurking just outside her vision. Every rearview mirror glance, every car that passed her seemed to carry a threat. She pulled up to Alex's apartment complex, the familiar building now somehow looking more imposing than usual. He wasn't just a colleague. Over the years, they had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and trust. But tonight, with everything at stake, trust was a dangerous game. She couldn't shake the nagging thought that maybe Alex knew more than he was letting on, or worse, that he could be involved in something bigger than either of them realized. Parking in the lot, Emily sat in her car for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. The darkened windows around her felt suffocating, as if they were closing in. She had no choice but to face the uncertainty head-on. She had to talk to Alex, find out if he knew anything that could help her. And if he didn't, she would have to find another way, even if it meant going deeper into this murky world of shadows and threats. She approached the building with purpose, taking the stairs two at a time. At the top, she knocked sharply on Alex's door. There was a brief pause before the sound of footsteps approached. The door opened just a crack, and Alex's tired eyes peered out at her. "Emily? Is everything okay?" His voice was warm, but there was something in his eyes, an unspoken concern. Emily hesitated, her mind working in overdrive, trying to decide how much to say. She couldn't afford to give away too much. If Alex was involved in something shady, she needed to tread carefully. She couldn't risk him finding out exactly what she suspected. "I need your help," she said finally, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I've gotten involved in something I don't understand, and I don't know who else to turn to." Alex frowned, concern deepening in his expression. "What kind of something? You look like you've been through the ringer." Emily's eyes darted around, making sure no one was lurking in the shadows, watching them. "It's about some bikers," she said quietly. I've been targeted by them. They're threatening me." Alex's face shifted as he processed her words, his brow furrowing in disbelief. "Bikers? Why would they target you?" "That's what I don't know," Emily replied. "But they're involved in something bigger. Something dangerous. They're watching me, and I don't know how to get out of this." For a moment, Alex stood still, as though considering his response carefully. His eyes flicked to the hallway behind him, and he stepped back to let Emily inside, closing the door quietly behind her. The apartment was dimly lit, and the air inside felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. "Sit down," Alex said, motioning toward the small couch in his living room. Emily lowered herself onto it, her heart still pounding, her thoughts racing faster than she could process. She watched Alex as he moved toward the kitchen, his back to her. For a moment, she considered telling him everything, the threats, the strange man who had appeared on her doorstep, the message from the bikers. But something held her back. She couldn't let her guard down completely. Not yet. Alex returned with 2 glasses of water, setting one in front of her. "You've got to be careful, Emily," he said, his voice softer now. "People like that, they don't just disappear. And they don't let go easily." Emily met his eyes, searching for any sign of deception. "Do you know anything about them?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of desperation. "Anything that could help me understand what they're after?" Alex paused, his gaze dropping to the floor before he met her eyes again. "I don't know specifics," he said, his voice guarded. "But I've heard things. People talk, you know? There are rumors about a group of bikers running operations in the area, illegal ones, mostly. Smuggling, extortion, that kind of thing. They're well connected, and they have a reputation for being ruthless. Emily's stomach churned. What do you mean ruthless? She asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Alex looked at her, his expression tight. It means they don't care who they hurt to get what they want. And they don't stop until they get it. He paused, his face darkening. You need to get out of this, Emily. Now. Before it gets worse. She could feel her pulse quicken at his words. It was exactly what she had feared. These bikers weren't just random thugs, they were organized, with power and influence that reached far beyond what she could handle. The photo, the threats, they were only the beginning. And as much as she hated to admit it, Alex was right. The deeper she got into this, the more dangerous it would become. But she couldn't back down. Not now. Not when she had come this far. She had no choice but to keep going, to push through whatever came next. She couldn't just run and hide, because hiding wouldn't make this go away. The bikers would find her again. I can't just walk away, Alex, she said quietly, her voice stronger now, despite the fear still swirling in her chest. They're not just going to forget about me. And I need to know what they want. Why me? Alex didn't respond right away. His eyes studied her, as if weighing the decision to say more, to reveal what he knew. But Emily could see the conflict in his gaze. He wasn't telling her everything, and she could sense the hesitation in his silence. He knew more than he was letting on, and it wasn't lost on her. You don't know what you're dealing with, Alex finally said, his tone low. And I don't want to see you get hurt. These guys, they play dirty. They'll use anyone to get to their goal. Be careful who you trust. His words hit her harder than she expected. Trust. That was the one thing she didn't have. Not with Alex. Not with anyone. Emily stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on his. I have to keep going. I have no choice. She turned and walked toward the door, but before she left, she turned back to Alex. Thank you for the warning. And then, with her heart pounding louder than ever, she stepped into the night, unsure of who to trust, but more determined than ever to find the answers she so desperately needed. The road ahead was dark, and the shadows that followed her were no longer just imagined. They were real, and they were closing in fast. The night air was cold, biting as Emily stepped out of Alex's apartment. She didn't even bother to glance at the street as she moved quickly toward her car. Every part of her screamed to turn around, to go back inside and ask Alex for more answers. But she knew it wasn't an option. She had crossed a line now. The bikers were watching, and Alex's warnings echoed in her ears, asterisk they won't let go. They're ruthless, asterisk, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Her mind raced as she started the car, the engine's hum filling the silence. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. The mystery of why they were after her still gnawed at her, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that whatever this was, it wasn't just a random encounter. It was personal. And in that realization, the weight of it all settled in. The city seemed to stretch endlessly before her as she drove. The familiar streets no longer offered any comfort. The more she drove, the more her mind spiraled, her thoughts bouncing between the bikers, the phone call, Alex's strange behavior, and that unnerving knock on her door earlier. Each moment felt like a ticking clock, and every shadow she passed felt like it was closing in on her. She had to find answers. She couldn't keep running. But where did she even begin? Her phone buzzed suddenly, the vibration startling her. She glanced down at it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the message. It was from an unknown number, and the text was simple yet chilling, asterisk stop digging. "You're not ready for what you'll find." A cold sweat broke out across her skin as she felt a jolt of fear pulse through her. It was them. The bikers. They were tracking her every move. The message had come in while she was at Alex's, which meant they were keeping tabs on her already. Her stomach twisted into knots, and she gripped the steering wheel tighter. The road ahead felt more suffocating with every second. Who were these people? Why her? And why had they sent that message now? Her phone buzzed again, and this time, she hesitated before looking. She was already on edge, the tension in her muscles building with every second of silence that stretched between the pings. Slowly, she unlocked the phone, hoping it was just a random call or text. But it wasn't. The new message was a photo. Her breath caught in her throat as she clicked on the image. It was a picture of her, taken from across the street, likely from a parked car, judging by the angle. Her eyes widened as she took in the details. This wasn't just a casual shot. It was taken recently, possibly just moments ago, when she'd left Alex's apartment. The bikers had been watching her, waiting. She couldn't stop the rush of panic that surged through her chest. The walls felt like they were closing in. They knew where she was. They knew what she was doing. And whatever they were planning was getting closer with every minute that passed. A sudden noise startled her, loud and jarring. It came from the alley to her left, a sharp sound of tires screeching against pavement. Emily's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. There it was. A dark motorcycle revved in the distance, its headlights piercing through the night. For a split second, Emily froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she recognized the unmistakable shape of the rider. She had seen that logo before, the one etched across the back of the biker's jacket, the same logo that had been in the restaurant. The biker's figure blurred as they sped up, gaining on her quickly. Emily's hand shook as she gripped the wheel, her eyes darting from the rearview mirror to the road ahead. The motorcycle was getting closer. Too close. It was too dangerous to keep driving like this, but she couldn't afford to stop. Not now. She needed to figure out where they were taking her. She needed to get answers before it was too late. She took a sharp turn down a narrow street, hoping to lose the biker in the maze of alleyways. Her pulse raced as she pushed the car harder, the tires squealing in protest as she swerved between parked cars. She could hear the roar of the motorcycle behind her, its engine like a threat she couldn't outrun. But she had to try. The alleyway stretched on, winding in ways she hadn't anticipated. She couldn't keep her bearings straight, her focus torn between the road ahead and the thundering noise behind her. The rider was close. Closer than she realized. Her phone buzzed again, and for a moment, Emily couldn't decide whether she should answer or keep focusing on the road. But the urgency inside her made her glance down. The message was short, but chilling. Don't run. We know where you're going. The biker's roar grew louder, and her heart lurched. She had to lose him. There was no other option. Emily slammed the car into a sharp turn, praying the biker wouldn't catch up. But luck wasn't on her side. As she turned onto a dead-end street, she saw it. There, blocking her escape, was a group of bikers. At least 5 of them, all lined up, their bikes casting ominous shadows under the dim streetlights. Her breath hitched. She was trapped. There was no way out now. Before she could even think about what to do next, the rider behind her pulled up beside her car, cutting off any route of escape. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced frantically at the group ahead. They were closing in on her from all sides. The biker who had been following her reached into his jacket and pulled something out, a phone. He raised it to his ear and spoke in a low voice, his words muffled by the engine noise. Emily's gaze snapped back to the group of bikers, who had now formed a semicircle around her. The man on the phone was the leader. She could feel it. She could see the way the others deferred to him. The leader's eyes locked onto hers as he stepped off his bike, his face partially covered by a dark helmet. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence intimidating even in the dim light. As he approached her car, Emily's pulse quickened. She didn't know what they wanted, but she had a sinking feeling that she wasn't going to like it. "Get out of the car," the leader said, his voice calm but filled with a quiet threat that made every muscle in her body tighten. She couldn't move. She couldn't think. But one thing was clear, she was out of options. The confrontation she had been dreading, the one she had tried to avoid, was now unavoidable. The questions she had about the bikers, about why they were after her, were about to be answered. But Emily knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, it wasn't going to be easy. And her life, as she knew it, would never be the same again. The cold, damp air wrapped around Emily like a suffocating blanket as she sat in her car, the engine idling but her mind frozen in fear. The group of bikers, now circling her vehicle like sharks closing in on their prey, left her with no doubt. There was no turning back now. Every corner of the street was blocked, and every avenue of escape had been sealed. The leader's figure, massive and looming, approached her with deliberate steps, his presence only adding to the weight of the situation. "Get out of the car," the leader's voice cut through the silence, steady and commanding. His tone was like gravel, rough, deep, and unyielding. The sound of his boots against the pavement seemed to echo in her ears as her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Her throat felt dry, and her heart raced, pounding in her chest with a deafening rhythm. She was being cornered, and she knew, deep down, that the only way out now was through them. She didn't answer right away. What could she say? Nothing she said would change what was happening. The bikers were here for a reason, and that reason didn't seem to involve leaving her alone. She tried to steady her breathing, thinking about her next move, but every moment she spent in indecision made her feel more powerless. She had no choice. She couldn't sit here forever. The leader stopped just in front of the driver's side window. Emily's eyes flicked to his helmet, the dark visor hiding his expression, making it impossible to read him. The other bikers remained in place, silently watching her, their motorcycles idling with a low hum that only added to the sense of impending danger. She swallowed hard, then opened the door slowly, stepping out into the cold night air. Her legs felt unsteady, like they might give way at any moment. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, trying not to show how terrified she truly was. The leader didn't move. He simply watched her with that same inscrutable expression, his hands resting on his hips. It was almost as if he were waiting for her to make the first move. "You've been asking a lot of questions, nurse," the leader said, his voice low but cutting. "We don't like people poking around where they don't belong." Emily's mind raced, scrambling for something to say. The truth was, she was starting to piece things together. It wasn't just that they were after her, they were after something she had, or something they thought she had. But what? And why did they think she was so important? "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm of panic raging inside her. "I haven't done anything to you." A low chuckle rumbled from beneath the leader's helmet. "That's where you're wrong, sweetheart. You've done plenty. You just don't know it yet." The words sent a chill through her. "I don't know it yet," it was like a cryptic warning, one that hinted at something far darker than she could possibly imagine. "Let's make this simple," the leader continued, his tone turning colder. "You're going to come with us. We've got a little chat to have, and you're not going to like it." Emily's stomach churned at the thought. She couldn't afford to go with them, not without answers. She had to find a way out. But how? She was surrounded, and no one was going to hear her scream if it came to that. "Why me?" Emily asked, her voice quieter now, but filled with the desperate need for an answer. "What do you want?" The leader didn't immediately respond. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "You've been poking around the wrong people. And now, you're in deeper than you realize. But we're not here to hurt you, yet." That last word hung in the air like a threat she couldn't ignore. Yet, it made her blood run cold. She was no longer dealing with just some bikers. These were people who had power, who controlled things in the shadows, and they were not afraid to use violence to get what they wanted. Suddenly, one of the other bikers, a smaller man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "Boss, you sure we should be wasting time talking?" The girl's clearly not getting it. She needs to be shown. The leader held up a hand, signaling for him to stop. His eyes stayed locked on Emily, as though he was reading her every move, every twitch of her muscles. Emily's pulse raced as she stood her ground, refusing to show weakness. She wasn't going to let them see how afraid she was. "Not yet. We'll talk when she's ready," the leader said, his voice firm. "But first, we need to make sure she understands how things work around here." The tension in the air grew heavier, suffocating. Emily felt her muscles tense as the other bikers shifted closer, their eyes never leaving her. She couldn't let them intimidate her. She had to think. She needed a plan. Without warning, the leader took another step forward, his body towering over hers. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folder, holding it up in front of her face. She saw the word confidential stamped in bold letters across the top. Her breath caught in her throat. "You've been asking questions about something you have no business asking about," the leader said. "This," he tapped the folder with a finger, "is what you've been digging into. And if you're smart, you'll drop it now. Because once you know too much, you don't walk away from it. Ever." Emily's mind raced, trying to process everything at once. This was why they were after her. It wasn't just because she was a nurse who had unknowingly gotten caught in something dark, it was something bigger. Something so dangerous that the bikers would stop at nothing to protect it. She had to find out what was inside that folder. The truth was right in front of her, but getting to it meant she had to survive this first. The problem was, she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold out. The leader's gaze darkened as he saw the hesitation in her eyes. "Don't make us drag it out of you, Emily," he warned, his voice low, like the growl of an animal ready to pounce. "I suggest you stop fighting. It's only going to make things worse." Emily's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment. The moment everything changed. Suddenly, a sharp sound pierced the air, a loud screech from the far end of the alley. All the bikers turned their heads at once, distracted. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She knew this was her chance. Without thinking, she bolted, sprinting toward the narrow opening between two buildings just ahead. The bikers shouted, their voices rising in anger, but she didn't stop. Her mind screamed at her to run faster, to get away while she still had a chance. The sound of engines revving and tires screeching filled the air behind her, but she didn't dare look back. The alley was dark and twisting, a labyrinth of narrow corridors and abandoned storefronts, but she kept running, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She had no idea where she was going, but the fear that gripped her body fueled her every step. Emily was done waiting for answers. She was done being a pawn in their game. If she had to find the truth on her own, she would. But one thing was for sure, she wasn't going down without a fight. The chase had begun. And there was no turning back now. Emily's feet pounded the pavement, her breath ragged as she sprinted deeper into the alley, the shadows closing in around her like a tightening noose. She barely had a chance to glance behind her, but the sound of the bikes was unmistakable, loud, menacing, and growing closer with every second. She pushed herself harder, faster, ignoring the burning in her legs, the way her lungs screamed for air. The night seemed to press in on her, the alley narrowing as she ran, her mind a blur of panic and survival instincts. She couldn't afford to let them catch her. Not now. Not when she was so close to understanding what this was all about. But just as she turned a corner, everything changed. The alley ahead wasn't empty as she expected. It was blocked. A dark figure stepped forward from the shadows, silhouetted against the faint glow of a nearby streetlight. Emily skidded to a halt, her heart crashing in her chest. She barely had time to react before the figure moved swiftly toward her, closing the gap with terrifying speed. Panic surged through her veins. Another biker. She didn't have the strength to run anymore, and the alley behind her was filling with the sound of engines. But as the figure emerged fully from the shadows, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a biker at all. It was Alex. For a moment, Emily just stood there, her heart hammering in confusion. What was he doing here? How had he found her so quickly? Emily, you need to stop, Alex said urgently, his voice low and strained. His expression was one she didn't recognize, filled with a kind of fear and desperation she had never seen in him before. You're in danger. You don't understand what's happening. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind was a jumble of questions, but she couldn't form any of them fast enough. She couldn't make sense of this new twist, Alex, the man she'd trusted, now standing between her and an unknown fate. What was going on? Alex, what's happening? Emily finally managed, her voice trembling. She was too exhausted to even think straight anymore. What do they want from me? Why are they chasing me? He glanced over his shoulder, and for a brief moment, Emily saw genuine fear flicker in his eyes. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for her arm. Listen to me, Emily. You have to trust me. I've been trying to protect you, but you've gotten too close. They're not just bikers. They're part of something much bigger, something that you don't want to get involved in. But it's too late now. I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to get caught up in this. His words made no sense, but she could see the sincerity in his face. The desperation. But there was a chill crawling up her spine. If Alex was really trying to protect her, why had he never told her about any of this before? Why hadn't he warned her sooner? Before she could respond, the roar of the motorcycles grew louder, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the bikers would be right on top of them. She glanced around frantically, looking for an escape, but the alley seemed to narrow with every passing second. There was no way out. Alex, you have to explain, Emily said, her voice a whisper. What are they after? Why me? Alex's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the street behind them. His grip on her arm tightened, almost painfully. It's not about you, Emily. Not exactly. They think you have something. Something they'll stop at nothing to get. And you don't even know what it is. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. Something she had? She had no idea what he was talking about, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. The strange behaviors, the cryptic warnings from the bikers, and now Alex, he was involved, somehow. But how? I don't have anything, she said, shaking her head. I'm just a nurse. I don't know what you're talking about. Alex's eyes softened for a moment, like he was trying to decide whether or not to tell her the truth. But then, the rumble of the engines became deafening. The bikers were almost upon them. Emily, listen to me, he said quickly, his voice frantic. You've been handling something. You've been taking care of people who shouldn't be here. I don't know exactly who they are, but I know they're dangerous. And now the bikers think you have something important. They think you have access to their plans. Her mind spun as she tried to make sense of what he was saying. Taking care of people? She had treated hundreds of patients over the years. But what plans? What was he talking about? And why hadn't he told her any of this before? The sound of the motorcycles grew louder, now right at the mouth of the alley. Alex grabbed her arm more firmly, pulling her into the darkness as he backed into an alcove between two buildings. His breath came fast, his eyes darting between her and the approaching danger. "Stay quiet," he hissed, crouching low. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Emily's heart was hammering so loud she could hear it in her ears. She clung to the shadows, every muscle tense as she fought to stay hidden. Through the small gap between the buildings, she could see the bikers creeping into the alley, their faces hidden behind their helmets, their postures rigid and dangerous. Then, the leader stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the alley like a predator scanning its surroundings. Emily held her breath, praying they wouldn't find her. She could see the anger in his body language as he scanned the darkened space. They knew she was here, she could feel it in her gut. But where was she? "Boss," one of the bikers muttered, his voice low. "I don't think she's here. The trail ends at the alley, but there's no sign of her." The leader's eyes narrowed, and he shook his head. "No. She's here. I can smell it. She's close." Emily's chest tightened. They were so close, she could feel the weight of Alex's hand on her arm, the tension between them as they huddled together in the dark. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel the heat of his body, the way he was shaking slightly from the cold or from fear. It was hard to tell. And then, a voice, so quiet but cutting through the silence like a knife, spoke from behind her. "You should have stayed out of this, Alex. You know that, don't you?" Emily froze. Alex's eyes went wide, a look of dread flashing across his face. Before she could even react, the leader of the bikers stepped out from behind her, standing in the same shadow where they had been hiding. Emily's heart stopped. "You," Alex whispered, his voice filled with horror. "No. You, were behind all of this?" The leader's helmet tilted slightly, as if amused. He chuckled, the sound dark and cold. "You were always a liability, Alex. I gave you a chance to stay out of it, but you had to go and get involved. Now look where we are. You've dragged her into this." The shock of realization hit Emily like a thunderclap. Alex wasn't just a man trying to protect her, he was one of them. He had known all along what they were capable of, and somehow, he had been a part of it. A part of the bikers, her mind reeled. Everything she had thought she knew had just been turned upside down. The stakes had just escalated. The world around Emily seemed to freeze, the air thick with tension. Her heart raced, every beat drowning out the sounds of the night. Alex, the man she had trusted, now stood there, his face pale and filled with a quiet resignation. She couldn't process the revelation. How could he be part of this? How could he have known and kept her in the dark for so long? The leader of the bikers took a slow step forward, his figure towering over her. "You made this harder than it needed to be, Alex," he said with a grim smile. "But now, it's time for you to face the consequences. Both of you." Emily's thoughts were spinning. Everything had changed in an instant. She wasn't just caught in a dangerous web, she was a pawn in a much larger game. The biker gang wasn't just some group of criminals, they were part of something far darker, something that had its claws deep in the underworld, and Alex had been a part of it from the beginning. Alex's eyes met hers, and in them, she saw the truth. He wasn't a man trying to protect her. He was a man who had sold his soul for power and money, and now, Emily had become just another obstacle in his path. "I didn't want this, Emily," Alex whispered, his voice thick with regret. "I never wanted to drag you into this mess. But I couldn't stop it. I thought I could keep you safe, but I was wrong. Emily stepped back, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had trusted him. She had let him into her life, her heart. But it had all been a lie. Everything he had ever told her, every word of comfort, now felt hollow. She had no idea who the man in front of her truly was. The man who had helped her, the one she had leaned on in times of need, had been playing a part all along. Her hands trembled as she tried to process the situation. The biker's presence was looming over them like a storm, and Emily couldn't afford to fall apart now. Not when she was so close to finding out the truth. Not when she had come this far. The leader shifted his weight, his dark eyes fixed on Emily. You should have stayed away from this. But since you're here, let's make it interesting. His voice was dripping with menace, and it sent a chill down her spine. We're going to have a little chat. But don't worry, Alex will be right there with you. Emily's pulse spiked. She didn't know what the leader meant by chat, but it was clear that whatever was coming next wasn't going to be good. The bikers had no intention of letting her go. They had their claws in too deep now, and she was caught in the middle of a power struggle she didn't understand. But before she could react, something unexpected happened. One of the bikers, the one who had been standing closest to the leader, suddenly stepped forward. He raised his hand, and in a move that was almost too quick to process, he pulled off his helmet, revealing a face Emily recognized. It was Mark. Mark, the detective she had met weeks ago, the one who had been investigating the very same gang. She had no idea how he had gotten here or why he was with the bikers, but his presence shattered everything she thought she knew. Mark, she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something, guilt. Maybe, or hesitation, but it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. It's not what you think, Emily, he said quietly, his voice low but steady. I'm not here to hurt you. The leader of the bikers gave a sharp laugh. Don't be fooled, Emily. He's one of us now. He's been working with us from the beginning. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Mark, the man who had seemed so genuine, was part of the operation. He had been playing both sides, and all the while, she had trusted him. Everything she had believed about him, about the investigation, was a lie. Mark's gaze softened as he took a step closer to her, his voice lowering. I never wanted you to be part of this, but I had no choice. They have leverage over me, Emily. I'm just trying to protect you in the only way I know how. A sick feeling twisted in her stomach. Leverage. What did they have on him? She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the weight of it all held her in place. She couldn't fight back against the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Alex, still standing in the background, let out a frustrated sigh. Mark, you shouldn't be doing this. You're making a mistake. Mark didn't respond. His eyes were on Emily, but they were filled with something different now, pity, regret. Whatever had brought him to this point, he was trapped, just like her. But why had he never told her the truth? Why had he dragged her into the chaos? The leader of the bikers moved toward them, his steps measured, confident. Enough talk. It's time to deal with the situation. He looked directly at Emily, his eyes cold. You should have stayed out of this. Now, you'll pay the price. Emily's mind raced, every instinct screaming for her to run, to do anything to escape. But there was nowhere to go. The bikers had her surrounded, and with Mark and Alex both now part of the gang, there was no one left to help her. She had to think fast. But before she could make any move, a sharp noise cut through the air, a loud cracking sound followed by the sudden screech of tires. The ground beneath her feet vibrated as the unmistakable sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Were they coming for her? The bikers immediately tensed, looking over their shoulders toward the source of the sound. Emily's pulse quickened as she realized what was happening. Mark and Alex, both of them, exchanged a brief glance, their expressions shifting from tension to something else, fear. The leader of the gang cursed under his breath. "We've been compromised," he growled. "We need to go, now." The bikers instantly turned, moving with the speed and precision of a well-coordinated unit. Before Emily could process what was happening, the leader gave one last look toward her and then disappeared into the shadows with the rest of his gang. The sirens grew louder, drawing closer, and in that moment, everything seemed to fall into chaos. Emily stood frozen, her heart still racing, but she couldn't move. Her mind was trying to catch up to what had just happened. What had Mark and Alex been hiding, and why had they let the bikers get so close to her? What had she gotten herself into? But then, as the sirens screamed closer, the true twist came. The flash of red and blue lights cut through the darkness, and a black car screeched to a halt just in front of her. The door opened, and out stepped a familiar face. Detective Harris, the one who had been working with Mark all along. Only this time, he wasn't here to help her. "Emily," Harris said, his voice calm but his eyes cold as he reached for her. "It's time you knew the full truth." The final twist had arrived. And Emily was about to learn that there was far more at play than she could have ever imagined. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as she stared at Detective Harris. The flickering blue and red lights from the squad cars outside illuminated his face, but the look in his eyes was colder than anything she'd seen before. He was no longer the man she had trusted. He was part of the web, and now it was clear that there was no one left to protect her. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the pieces that had come together. Mark, Alex, Harris. They had all been playing different roles, spinning a web of lies, and Emily was caught in the center, a pawn they had never meant to protect. She couldn't breathe. Her thoughts were suffocating her. "Emily," Harris said again, stepping closer. His voice was smooth, but the hint of something darker lingered beneath it. "I know you're confused. But this is bigger than you think. You were never meant to be involved in all of this, but now that you are, there's no going back." She shook her head, trying to wrap her brain around the chaos unfolding in front of her. No going back, what was he talking about? She hadn't asked for any of this. She was just a nurse, a woman who had been doing her job, trying to make a living, trying to keep her life together. She never asked for bikers or criminals or betrayals. "So, what is this all about then?" Emily managed to say, her voice shaky but defiant. "What was the point of all this? Why put me in the middle?" Harris paused, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. When he spoke again, his tone was softer, almost apologetic. "I didn't want it to go this far, Emily. But you were the key. You've been treating people who are connected to something much bigger than just this city. You were involved with a network of underground operations that stretched far beyond your hospital, and we needed someone on the inside. We needed you." The words hit Emily like a punch. The hospital, people she had treated, the thought that she had unknowingly been caught up in something so sinister was more than she could bear. She wanted to scream, to run away from it all, but the reality was that she had no escape. "Not now. I'm just a nurse," she snapped, frustration and disbelief rising in her voice. "I didn't know anything about any underground operations. I'm just trying to help people, and you used me. You all used me." Harris's expression hardened again, the moment of empathy vanishing. "It wasn't personal, Emily. We knew you were a perfect fit for the job. You had access to people, to information. You were too valuable to let go. Her stomach churned at the thought of being manipulated all this time, all while thinking she was just doing her job, helping people like she had always done. Everything was a lie. Mark's smile, Alex's concern, Harris's offers of help, they had all been pieces of a much larger puzzle, and she was nothing but a piece to be moved around. "Why didn't you just tell me?" she asked bitterly, the sting of betrayal sharp in her voice. "Why did you let me get caught up in all of this?" Harris didn't answer right away. Instead, he sighed and looked away for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. Then, he finally spoke. "The truth is, we didn't know how deep you were already involved. You started getting close to things you shouldn't have. And then, when you got closer to Alex, well, that just made things more complicated. We didn't plan for that." The mention of Alex made Emily's chest tighten. She thought about their time together, the moments of closeness. The small details that now felt like lies. The betrayal cut deeper now that she knew the truth about him, about his involvement in this dark world. He had never been the person she had thought he was, and she realized she had been too blind to see it. "I trusted him," she whispered, almost to herself. Harris's eyes softened briefly. "You weren't the only one." Emily's blood boiled. "And now? What happens now?" "Now," Harris said slowly, his eyes hardening again, "you get to make a choice. We can offer you protection. You can keep your life, keep going, keep helping people. But you'll need to join us. There's no other way. Or you can walk away from it all, but that's going to come with a price. The bikers will come for you. The people behind them, they won't stop. Not until they get what they want. It's your choice." Emily felt the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket of concrete. Join them, become part of something she didn't understand, something she had never wanted to be part of. The thought made her want to run again, but there was no running now. The web was too tight. And the fear that she would never truly escape it gnawed at her. For a long moment, all Emily could do was stand there, her mind spinning, her future hanging in the balance. She thought of her patients, the people she had sworn to protect, the ones who trusted her. But how could she protect them now? How could she live with herself knowing that the people she was helping might be connected to something like this? "I don't know what to do," she said quietly, her voice breaking. I just wanted to do my job." Harris didn't respond, but his expression softened. "I know, Emily. I know." He paused before adding, "But you have more power than you realize. You always have." Emily looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You've been in the middle of all this. You've seen things you shouldn't have. But you're not powerless. They've underestimated you. You can be the one to bring this all down." It took a moment for the full meaning of his words to sink in. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She had the knowledge. She had the key to everything. And if she could find the courage, maybe, just maybe, she could use that power to stop this. To end it before it consumed her and everyone she cared about. But Emily knew one thing for certain, her life would never be the same. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, and it might cost her everything. But she was done being a victim. She was done being manipulated. She had survived too much already to back down now. Taking a deep breath, she straightened up, her mind made up. No more lies. No more hiding. "I'm going to stop this." Harris gave her a long, searching look, and for a moment, she wondered if he was going to stop her. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded once. "I knew you had it in you." The decision had been made. Emily was done being a part of someone else's game. She would take control. And though she didn't know what the future would hold, she finally understood that she had the power to shape her own path, to fight back against the darkness that had threatened to swallow her whole. It wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. But now, she was ready to face whatever came next.